regarding
Well,
that. Yeah.
it's quite a learning experience for us as well. And now that we're getting more specific, like say, for instance, the climate change in Chennai, I think doing 10 webinars on one subject, I think is going to be much deeper. And earlier one was very spread, but this is good. And no, I think it's been quite a learning experience for us as well. And I'm very happy. But we are not stopping at 100. We are already committed 150. And
So
hopefully
we are
we'll
good
take
to
it to
go.
100. Not that the
Dr.
number
Moma, I think
matters,
we are
but
ready. You're already live on YouTube.
okay, hello.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me kind of start then. I think, friends and colleagues, it's my privilege to welcome you all to the second episode of the 10-part new webinar series focused on the climate change and the cities. The first episode that took place last week presented how COP28, this COP28 that took place in Dubai recently, handled the urbanization matter in the context of climate change. Today's webinar focuses on what climate change means to the cities. How will it impact their day-to-day business, the living and working of the citizens, planning, growth, and future development? Also, how cities contribute to climate change and what needs to change for cities to be more prepared to meet the climate challenge. To understand cities' relation to climate change, it is enough to say that the world's cities occupy just 2% of this land, but consume 75% of its resources and throw 75% of their waste in the environment. There is no global or overall sustainability without urban sustainability. So that is the core context, this core relationship of cities with climate change and sustainability. Unlike other webinars, in this series by INHAF, we're calling it the Rethinking Cities, which has completed more than 100 episodes in 3 years since we started during the pandemic lockdown. This webinar series has a special connect. It is an integral part of an INHAF project called Climb Act Chennai, Climb Act Chennai, and is meant to do 4 things. 1, introduce the project to Chennai city. 2, to learn more about Chennai in context of its preparation to meet the climate challenge. 3, no institutions, organizations, agencies, and individuals working on different aspects of climate challenge to learn from them and strengthen the effort in the process. And 4, make contribution to the extent possible in developing mitigation, adaptation, and resilience strategies. The project sees Chennai as a microcosm of the big global climate change phenomenon and hopes to contribute to solution making in the local context involving local knowledge, resources, and skills. It is an action project by a small civil society organization and is meant to take the climate change phenomenon to common citizens and help them prepare to meet the challenge head on. So that is the objective of the project. Dr. Raghunandan, who is leading this project and is also moderating this webinar, and distinguished panel members that we have today will certainly tell you more about this subject. However, before Raghu Saab takes over to conduct this session, It's my task to tell you why INHAF is running this webinar series for such a long time and what it aims to achieve. The underlying rationale of the governing hypothesis is that we as a country, its institutions, experts, specialists, professionals, and its governments have not been able to read the nature of the urban challenge properly. Both its positive potential, if managed well, and its negative consequences, if found wanting. And therefore, response, it leaves much to be desired and seems to lack direction and purpose, both in its immediate context with regard to quality of life of the people and the exploration of its future potential. The cities as they are, as they grow and develop, seem to convey that things are not what they should be and need an urgent re-see, rethink, and react. And repeat, urgent re-see, rethink, and react in policy, programs, institutions, and investment. There is an unspoken, unseen, and unarticulated silent emergency, and the missing urgency and creativity in response is causing harm in economic, environmental, and human terms. We weigh this very heavily, that we have a problem in terms of how we handle urban challenge. The above narrative, however, is not to run down or harp on the inadequacies or in any way take away from the importance of the development and investment programs in urban infrastructure and basic services improvement in our cities that are suffering from massive quantitative and qualitative deficiency under population pressure, investment backlog, and institutional constraints. It is an effort to argue the case to put forward a difficult to make a point that meeting the Indian urban challenge effectively requires more than the current efforts and current investment. It requires something more and different, and that is thinking out of box, non-conventional approaches, and imaginative strategies. In approaching problems and finding solution, it requires a different mindset, a paradigm shift. A broad-based societal partnership is the conceived way of doing this work, mobilizing societal knowledge and resources, and utilizing skills, domain expertise, and experience of subject experts, professionals, specialists, and researchers, and engaging the interested and concerned institutions and agencies in a working partnership in search for the new approaches and solutions is envisaged as an organizational model for this work. This webinar series is a part of a wider national societal effort aimed to bring in not only fresh ideas and perspectives, but also new voices, new collectivism, new togetherness, new partnership, and new energy in articulating the need for and ways to rethinking our cities, both redefining the urban challenge and finding more effective ways to addressing it. It is taking the urban challenge to the people. It is preparing them to engage and contribute. It is making the urban development challenge a societal challenge, a people's challenge, along with that of the government. That is the kind of background or thought processes that has led to this particular webinar series. It's not the number of 100. What really matters is what new ideas, new innovations, new thought processes are emerging, We are not very sure, but we know something is happening. And so with this introduction, I hand over to Professor, to the Dr. Raghunandan to conduct the sessions. Thank you, Raghu Saab. It's all yours now.
Thank you, Kirtibhai, for that usually lucid presentation, an overview not only of the webinar series, but an overview of the problems and issues facing urban development, in which we are now adding on this new layer of problems being faced, and that is climate change. So that is what this our project seeks to do in the city of Chennai, and that is what this webinar series also aims at doing. Kirti Bhai spoke about the first seminar that we had, which was on COP28 and the new initiatives on urbanization under the COP process in the UNFCCC. And this webinar addresses the issue of cities and climate change with an overview perspective. We are not, as Climate, we are not making a presentation of our own studies. We have referred to it in our invitation letter. The approach paper we have developed over the past several months of fairly extensive research. We are not presenting here. We have circulated it through our invitation, but in each of the following webinars, which will be subject specific, first we'll take up 3 or 4 subjects on adaptation and resilience, followed by 3 or 4 key areas of mitigation or decarbonization. In each of those, we will also be presenting our findings and our recommendations on what we can do. I'll now request Karthik to please share my presentation. I will set the context for the discussion to follow by posing a few questions and placing a few issues for consideration of the panelists. And the panelists are, of course, completely free to either ignore this context setting or to frame their own presentations in the way they want. However, I would be obliged if some of these issues, if it strikes them as being important, they would also take up in the course of their presentations. Next, please, Karthik. Yeah, so it's well recognized now, and successive reports of the IPCC and now in the COP process, starting from Glasgow through Sharm el-Sheikh and Dubai, it's now well recognized that with the advancing population in urban areas likely to hit about 70% by 2050, we are already more than half. Urban areas are already very deeply affected by climate, and that's well before we have reached the 1.5 target, leave alone the 2 degrees. So if these impacts are already there, one can only imagine what they are likely to be when we officially cross 1.5 and later 2 degrees. The major impacts that have been felt and are documented widely, there are others, of course, but these are the major ones, are heat extremes, extreme rainfall and other extreme weather events, snow, blizzards, cyclones, etc. And some slow onset events like sea level rise. They're not things that suddenly happen to you overnight, but they gradually build up and then the impacts will be felt. It's like a slow boil case like sea level rise as an example. Now, all these impacts in urban areas, which are compact areas representing very substantial portion of GDP, once again close to about 70%, in many countries more of the nation, witness high and recurring economic losses. If you get floods of the kind Chennai had and this year, and in several previous years. Then Bombay has, and then Delhi has, and so on. And the frequency and the severity of such extreme rainfall is likely to keep increasing as we go along. The scale of the damage and the scale of the losses can well be imagined. So there's economic losses, there's damage to livability, to health and wellness, and there is worsening inequality. The more the impacts, the more the most vulnerable populations are impacted by it, which further worsens the inequality, which we know is structurally built into our societies and is visible especially in urban areas. It's also notable that cities are sources of more than 70% of global energy emissions. So therefore, in cities, both the challenge of resilience and adaptation impacts of climate change, as well as the need to curb emissions, are both strongly in focus. So urban systems are, and I quote from the IPCC, critical for achieving deep emission reductions and for advancing climate resilient development. And some have said that the battle may be won or lost in cities. Next, please, Karthik. So there are perhaps two key elements, if you like, to the issue of climate change and cities. The first is the need for planning. That whatever else we have been doing or not doing in terms of urban planning, urban development, and so on, climate change should now onward certainly be taken as an integral part of urban settlements and infrastructure, and planning should be done like that. And I'm sure the presentations that we will see today, as well as over the course of the next 8 or 10 webinars, will bring out how unplanned urban development or poorly planned urban development also worsens precisely those issues of climate change, both on impacts as well as on emissions that we were talking about earlier. The second crucial element, which is now being appreciated gradually, is that there needs to be an integrated approach to physical, natural, and social infrastructure. And whatever we do needs to view and look at co-benefits across sectors. It's not enough to say, I will tackle carbon emissions from the power sector. I will tackle emissions coming from the transport sector. I will just look at the flood in one case, but that each effect that is felt has multiple dimensions in society, in the economy, and similarly, every approach that we take to tackle those problems will also have corresponding benefits or penalties across different sectors. And special attention here needs to be paid to, and I'll just quickly go through them because I'm sure the other panelists would be speaking on these in more detail, are land use, which is both in terms of the form, urban form, and the equity aspects. Secondly, transportation, which needs to be low carbon or no carbon, which needs to be public rather than private, and which also includes active mobility, non-motorized forms, which also have enormous health benefits, which we have not yet understood, I think, in our planning processes on cities in our country. Buildings, and there's going to be a big focus on those in our webinar series also, which need to be energy efficient with low carbon embedded in them. And early action is required to prevent the carbon lock-in, because buildings are built not with 1 year, 2 year utility in mind, but with 30 to 40 to 50 years utility in mind. So whatever you do today is frozen for the next. So if you've got an inefficient building, which is going to consume a lot of energy, etc., that is locked in for the next 50 years. It's not going to change. And what we are seeing in our country today is, and especially in our cities, burgeoning big towers, tower blocks being constructed, office building, residential building, and they are coming up at a huge rate. And while those are being built, we are still sitting and not yet started the process of ensuring that these buildings are built in an energy efficient manner so that the energy consumed inside those buildings is reduced significantly. We are missing opportunities every day while the problem worsens. Uh, then, as I said, energy consumption, particularly equitable access to energy. Energy is being consumed, but is being consumed in a skewed manner by the better off, whereas those who have not have very poor access to all forms of energy, whether it is electricity, whether it is cooking, or it is transport, etc. So the issue of equitable access is clearly important. And as we'll see in our subsequent webinars also, the need to focus on nature-based solutions equally, along with all the other aspects we have spoken of, what is commonly known as the green-blue infrastructure, water bodies, green spaces, urban forests, which should function as urban commons rather than be again gated or kept only for some sections of the population to benefit. Then there's waste, and then there is conservation, recycling, and reuse of water. All these are critical aspects of the urban cityscape, which needs to be addressed and which are already being impacted by climate change. And as I said, our approach paper looks at these aspects in an interrelated manner, and whatever proposals we have made also looks at these potential interrelationships between one and the other and the benefits or penalties on different sectors. Next, Karthik. So a few questions I'll pose for our panelists to think of if they want to consider. We've got some cities which have worked out city-specific climate action plans like Chennai, Mumbai, Pune, Surat, Rajkot, etc. One question that is quite often asked is, can or should such climate action be taken up city-wise? Is that possible? Is it doable? Some people feel you can't address city-specific issues because issues are larger, they are at the state level, etc. So this is one issue. We think, yeah, it is possible, it is needed because it is feasible to do so. It has high success potential, with cities being compact areas with multi-sectoral benefits possible, and to offer many co-benefits which enable you to sell it in that sense to the public, to make it more responsive to people's needs. The next issue linked to this is, can one set targets for urban mitigation? We've already had sectoral targets in India. There are sectoral targets in industry, in steel, cement, and so on. Although they are posed as energy saving targets, they are also emissions related targets. The idea being, like I said earlier, that it is easier to sell energy savings than it is to sell emissions. In emissions, somebody thinks, I'm doing this for others. Whereas energy saving, he thinks in terms of, I'm doing this for myself because I'll save money. So if it makes it easier to sell it that way, fair enough, that's a possibility. So we already have some sectoral targets in India. The Indian Railways has set a target of being net zero by 2030. That's another target. So why not cities setting themselves targets? Chennai has set itself a target of net zero by 2050. We ourselves feel that we need not take such targets literally in cities. In India's NDC, we have set a target of 2070 to be net zero. So that's an overall national target. But for us, in any case, whether you say net zero 2050 or 2060 or whatever, it signals high ambition. Right now, without such targets, each city is drifting along in some ways. So it is good to set some targets, whatever they are, at least as a sign of high ambition, and keep working towards that. And that's the way we have looked at this. 2 points I'd like to make. All countries today, as was seen in COP28 in Dubai, after the global stock take, all countries are now required to submit enhanced NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, by mid 2025. Where is these enhanced NDCs going to come from? Current NDCs of India are confined to three sectors. The first is electricity production, generation of power. The second is broadly energy efficiency, reducing energy intensity at the economy level. And the third is forestry. There is doubt whether we will be able to meet the targets on forestry, given the greater intrusion of mining and other activities in forest areas. So we are left with the first two. Is that going to be enough to enable us to enhance NDCs? And I suggest if we take targets in cities, which are multi-sectoral, they cover transport, they cover buildings, they cover power generation, also they cover waste. So many areas we will be able to add to what we have already said, which do not touch these areas at the moment. So cities gives us a good opportunity where we can, if we integrate them with the NDCs, to raise our level of ambitions. It also is required to be noted that many countries in the COP process have developed national adaptation plans. At COP28 in Dubai, the earlier drafts almost said that it would be compulsory for countries to submit national adaptation plans. They finally sort of loosened that. They have not made it compulsory, but it is now going to be increasingly pressure being built to develop national adaptation plans. Regardless of whether it is demanded or required in the COP process or not, clearly all of us, I think, understand that climate impacts have advanced so much that it is necessary for us to develop a national approach to this. This cannot be any longer viewed or looked at piecemeal. We'll do something here and we'll do something there. You need a national view, you need a national perspective, and most importantly, you need dedication of some national financing mechanisms to enable this. Next, please. Karthik, are we done?
Just a
Karthik,
second.
are we done? Yeah, okay. Karthik, we are done, no? Where's Karthik gone?
Sorry, Raghuji, there's one more left.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I had
So, yeah. So the last one I wanted to pose is implementation issues. We've looked at, these are what are required, these are what needs to be done, a national plan is required, and so on. If we look at some of the implementation issues, even which those cities which have looked at climate action plans, fixed targets, and so on, there are several problems in these implementation issues, regardless of whether you've got a climate action plan or not. The first is a well-known problem in urban governance, which is the weaknesses we have in governance structures in urban areas, whereas whatever their weaknesses in rural areas, we've made some advances in the 73rd Amendment, decentralization of powers. This is very weak in the urban areas. That is, I think, well understood. I don't need to elaborate on that. Particularly, the urban local bodies are not empowered. They are certainly not financially autonomous, except for a few rich corporations. And they are largely dependent on either the state government or the union government, or both, for both policy as well as for finances. A national adaptation plan would provide for some financial reliability for launching plans, either to build resilience or to take up decarbonization projects. These are expensive. Flood mitigation, for example, Chennai is laying thousands of kilometers of sewage, stormwater drainage lines. These are expensive, but they will pay back. You invest the money now, they will pay back by preventing the losses every year. Just as you invest in an energy efficient air conditioner, it will pay back in a matter of a year or two through your savings on your electricity bills. So investment in climate resilient infrastructure is good, and it will pay back both in terms of recurring damage costs. It will also pay back in reducing healthcare costs, in energy savings, etc. But this would require institutionalized collaboration between the union government and the state government, both due to jurisdictional issues as well as due to fiscal issues. There are some areas which are within the purview of states or cities. There are some areas in the purview of the center, but these need to come together in order to be able to tackle many of these problems. And of course, money is a crucial thing. It cannot be done by central funds alone, and it cannot be done by city or state funds alone. So our NDCs need to be reimagined. The IPCC reports, the various COP resolutions, they call for now, certainly after the global stocktake, the next round upgraded NDC is required to be economy-wide, all government. That is the whole of government approach, covering and embracing the entire economy, all sectors. Now that needs to be the approach, rather than just singling out one or two sectors as we have done in our NDCs in the past. And therefore, I believe that urbanization and urban planning also need to be reimagined in this context. So I think these are the issues I wanted to pose in how we view cities and climate change in our context, and what can be done going forward in looking at city level climate action across the country. I'll stop there, and I hope that I've raised some relevant issues which other panelists could address. Thank you. And to kick off our discussions, I'll ask Raman Mehta to speak first. Raman is from the Vasudha Foundation. Vasudha has worked extensively in different parts of the country, as well as on national and international aspects of climate change, and has done extensive work in Tamil Nadu, including in urban areas, in collaboration with the Tamil Nadu government. So over to Raman. Raman, about 15 minutes. Yeah.
Thanks, Raghuji. I don't have a presentation, but I will try to, how shall one say, you have presented a sort of overview of all the issues that concern probably Chennai, and not just Chennai, but all of our cities, large cities and small cities, if I may say so. But I think to just sort of one general point that I'd like to make is that we have some projections, national projections on how quickly we are going to become urbanized in terms of more people living in cities than in villages in our country, and that point of inflection is supposed to be 2035, if I'm not mistaken. But my sense is that because of the unfolding impacts of climate change, the rural urban migration would probably accelerate. And what that means is that there will be more pressure on the city infrastructures as we go along, including Chennai, than is being anticipated at the moment. So I think maybe all the planning that is being done, or forward planning that is being done in cities, I think they need to factor in climate change. And I'm not sure whether that is happening within the city planning circles or not. I may be mistaken, but I don't see that is happening. That's number one. Number two, in terms of city resilience, I think the critical issue in Chennai at the moment is that, vis-a-vis climate change, Chennai in the news has been, extreme rainfall, especially of the northeast monsoon, that leg of the monsoon. A lot of water falling in Chennai, unprecedented levels of rainfall. It happened even, the previous rain cycle, and therefore that leading to flooding. And so that's something that is a clear priority for Chennai as a city. I dare say it's a clear priority for many other cities. I mean, just to sort of give you a bit of a context on, say, Delhi. So this year, Delhi had unprecedented floods, which were being compared to the very, very extensive floods that happened in 1978. But having said that, the comparative picture, if you see, is that the amount of water that was how shall one say, drained into the Yamuna was slightly less than it was in 1978. In 1978, some flood defenses, very extensive rather, flood defenses had been built up in Delhi, which were breached this year. But to some extent, what contributed to that was that the Yamuna floodplains, all after the barrage in Yamunanagar, the Yamuna floodplains have got highly compromised. So even though the amount of water that was released into the Yamuna was a little bit less than 1978, the extensive flood defenses built up in 1978 were still breached, and we had a substantial part of our city underwater. So in a sense, Chennai's issues are also probably similar, because what you have is that since 1967, if I'm not mistaken, the number of water bodies and lakes that Chennai had and tanks that Chennai had has declined very drastically. Those areas have been constructed upon, and therefore the ability of the city to absorb the water that it receives through rainfall has declined, which therefore results in flooding. And no matter what kind of drainage you build, if a lot of rain is going to fall, in a very short time, like it happened even, this particular previous season, as well as the earlier flood in Chennai, you will have a problem. So that's the resilience part, which I would sort of say, in terms of kickstarting, I would, suggest that we focus on it. In terms of and despite the fact that Raghuji says we should all be thinking of, economy-wide and all government approach, I think the sectors that need to be addressed from a emission reduction perspective, or looking at the fact that there is greater, because there are greater emissions in cities, and therefore there is greater potential for emission reduction. I think we need to break it down in terms of the different sectors that one needs to concentrate on. And these are clearly transport, energy, buildings, waste, to just sort of, prioritize once again. Although I'm not saying that the other sectors are not important, and these need to be, looked at specifically, and plans made for reducing emissions from these sectors. I think waste is an especially important sector because it's a focus on waste is important from, I think, two angles. One is that I'm not even sure whether we are correctly estimating, or accurately estimating our waste generation. In many cases, the data simply doesn't exist. But at the same time, the waste, sort of emissions from waste are growing very, very quickly. And those sort of emissions need to be controlled, and they can be controlled because there are co-benefits. So you can, use waste in different ways. You can use waste to generate more electricity, greener electricity. You can use waste to for example, provide an alternative to our reliance on chemical fertilizers through composting and so on, and also to further the circular economy. And the waste sort of circular economy is an important part of that economic initiative that also needs to be taken. Transport, again, all the issues that Raghuji also alluded to. We need to, for example, focus more on public transport, make it easy for people to take to public transport, to use it extensively, as opposed to private transport. Look at, spaces for promoting non-motorized transport. Our roads, for example, at the moment, including in Chennai, are just not designed for, for the convenience and benefit of cyclists and pedestrians. It's cars and motorized vehicles all the way that the roads tend to be designed for. Then all the points that Raghuji made about buildings are valid, and that is something that needs to be looked at very, very seriously. But I think there is another problem. The problem is that if we assume that the rate of urbanization is going to go up, and more people are going to be coming in to cities, including in Chennai, I am not sure whether our city authorities are geared up to ensure, on the one hand, provision of adequate infrastructure for the new people that will be coming in, especially those that are not well off, that do not have the resources to buy a house or whatever else it is that one needs when one moves into a city. But the fact that these are the people that will be forced to find housing in areas which are vulnerable, which are low-lying, flood-prone, and so on and so forth, and therefore their resilience is compromised. And there is a bit of a problem with equity here, and that problem is not something that is being addressed adequately. There is also this other problem that if, for example, so one of the solutions that is being offered in the case of transportation is electric vehicles. Now, if electric vehicles come into our transport fleet in a big way, what that is going to do is going to lead to the shedding of jobs in the allied sectors to transport, in terms of, say, the mechanics who offer services for maintenance of the vehicles and so on and so forth. And that is going to result in an unemployment problem. So what is it that we are doing to address that, or whether we are even thinking about doing that? And that all ties up to this whole debate on just transition, which a lot of us must have heard about. But just transition at the moment is being spoken about in terms of just say coal phase out. But there are various other issues that the transition that we are engaged in would have implications for, and that I don't think we are even beginning to think about. So that's the other part. And Chennai especially is or areas around Chennai are transport, or rather they're auto manufacturing hubs. Now, as the electric vehicle manufacturing, for example, takes root, and you have a, say, quote unquote, transformation of the private vehicle fleet in India, my sense is that the number of people that are employed in the auto sector or in the auto manufacturing sector will decline, and also the employment that the ancillaries, auto ancillaries generate will also decline. So there's going to be this whole, equity perspective or just transition perspective that one needs to think about, and one that probably at the moment our policymakers are not thinking. This will all need money if we want to do proper planning for all these issues. It will also need focus. And I think one of the other problems that we have is that we do not yet, and Raghuji alluded to the fact that there is lack of capacity in many of our urban bodies and our urban planning processes and so on and so forth, and lack of knowledge. But I think another critical aspect of concern to my mind is that I think even in the general public, despite the fact that there is a lot of talk of climate change and its impacts and what we need to do in order to address climate change, within the general public, there is not enough awareness or enough appreciation of what needs to happen and what needs to be done. And that, to my mind, is a critical sort of problem, apart from the fact that we have a lack of capacity within government, we have a lack of capacity within institutions, and so on and so forth. But I also feel that there is a lack of appreciation of the scale and the magnitude of the problem. And I think that is also something that needs to be worked on. I think I'll stop here. I would be happy to answer questions if there are any. And happy to give the floor back to Raghuji.
Great. Thank you, Raman. Thank you very much. I think the issues of just transition that you brought up are important. I hope we'll get a chance to discuss those in sectors other than the usual ones they are spoken about, like you said, in the transition away from coal. There are also issues involved in other sectors, in renewable energy, in electric vehicles, etc. We'll take questions, etc. afterwards. Meanwhile, I request all the speakers to just keep having a look at the chat box, and any particular questions that come up after your presentation or you think are relevant to you, just keep a note of those so that at the end, when we go in for our Q&A, you are already sort of prepared to answer those. Yeah, I'll next call upon Dr. Benjamin John from C40, which is a global organization devoted to action in cities. The number 40 came because that is where the number of cities who had joined in the program earlier was being referred to. Now the number 40 has, of course, gone way beyond that, but the number C40 has stuck. And C40 is also the organization behind the Chennai Climate Action Plan, which I'm sure he'll be speaking about today. So without more ado, I'll hand it over to Benjamin John. And I think Karthik will put up his brief CV up on the chat box while he's presenting. Benjamin, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Raghunandan, for the opportunity to present at this forum. I thank Kethi ji also for giving us the opportunity to discuss, our ongoing work with Chennai. So, as Raghunandan rightly mentioned, we are, a network of nearly currently 97 global cities that are working together to address the challenges and issues that we face due to climate change. And these are, cities are across the globe, both the global south and the global north. In India, we have about 6 cities that are working together. So we have Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, Kolkata, and Ahmedabad that is part of the C40 cities network in India and are working together to address these issues. So, how do we really do it? Like how we work, as I have just one slide about how we really work with our cities. So one is peer-to-peer exchange. I think that's one of the most important things. So cities are able, we create platforms where cities are able to exchange between themselves and learn from each other on how they have, addressed or solved issues that they have, been facing that are similar to each other. So we kind of pair cities that are similar in context, that are, based in the global south and can learn from each other. So we have a second way is through technical assistance programs. So we have programs where we provide direct technical assistance to cities. And the third, which I would, encourage everyone who is here to look at, we have something called the Knowledge Hub, where we have a series of articles and, synthesize small reports that can be accessed by everyone. So this is basically learnings from all our cities. And I'm sure it will be useful to most people who are able to access this. So please do go on to our website and look at the Knowledge Hub. So how we really do it is we don't have any kind of membership fees that city has to pay, but how cities keep their membership in the network is through showing action and leadership on the ground. So they're kind of audited year on year on the leadership standards, and there are 5 key leadership standards, and I think what I'm mainly going to talk about is one, which is plan. So every C40 city needs to have a climate action plan in place, which kind of becomes a blueprint for the city to address the challenges it is facing with respect to climate change. So there are 2 aspects to this. One is how can the city reduce emissions over a period of time, and how can the city build resilience to risks. So these are 2 kind of objectives of of the climate action plan that we help our cities to prepare. So coming to Tamil Nadu and Chennai, so Tamil Nadu and Chennai, I would say, has been pretty much at the forefront of addressing the climate issue, the challenges with respect to climate change. Very progressive at the state level. I think one of the most progressive environment departments, I would say, across India. Tamil Nadu has, that, and they really have been pushing the envelope in terms of, addressing climate change and very proactive, I would say, at that. So there are a number of, large plans and programs that at the state level that has, come together, which is all looking at addressing climate change. So I think all of you know as well, I'm just going to go back to the previous slide. Sorry. All of you know that the under the Department of Environment, they have set up a Tamil Nadu Green Climate Company, which is kind of a first of its kind. It's an SPV that has been set up under the State Environment Department that looks at specifically projectizing and implementing climate action across the state. And they have also, set up the mandate where districts across the state need to now start also preparing their climate action plans. So I think that is a very, progressive way to look at addressing climate change. Unless you can't measure what the challenges and issues are, you really can't plan for it. So, yeah. So coming to Chennai, and this is the process that we followed in the preparation of the climate action plan. I think as I unpack this process, I think I hopefully would be able to address some of the provocations that Raghunandan did put up in the beginning of this discussion. So the first bit of it is actually really building the evidence that you need a very strong baseline, data backed, study that is required if we need to take decisions on the ground to address these challenges. So one, we've prepared a greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the city of Chennai for the year 2018-19. And the second bit of evidence that was built was a climate change risk assessment that was done for the city. So these are the two pieces of baseline that was prepared. So based on this, a set of goals, targets, and actions were identified, all through a stakeholder-led engagement process. So we had multiple discussions. Close to 200 discussions were conducted over the 2-year period of the plan preparation, with multiple stakeholders, government, non-government, CSOs, NGOs. So there was multiple discussions that took place during the plan preparation process itself. So I'm going to kind of talk about the first bit, which was building the evidence. So as I said, we did a climate change risk assessment that was done, and we identified 3 main buckets under which the risks were kind of looked at for Chennai. One is the flooding and storms, heat and water scarcity. So Chennai, funnily, in the summers has issues related to water scarcity, and in the monsoons, those very areas get flooded. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, the issues that the city is facing. And the third one, I think, which is the most contentious one, is the sea level rise. So we also looked at multiple studies that have actually modeled sea level rise in the city. So I think one of the key data points that we used was the sea flows, which was done for Chennai, which is actually a GIS-based mapping that was developed by the National Center for Coastal Research. So they have done a research based on the terrain, topography, volume of rainfall. All of this was modeled, and they have identified areas that are prone to flooding across various intensities of rainfall. So they've looked at scenarios like the RCP 8.5, which is a high emission scenario. And what you get is, a map that looks something like this. So mainly along most of Chennai's canals and stormwater drainages, you will find that these areas are prone to flooding. And what we also did was we overlapped various GIS layers on top of this. So we put layers of infrastructure, layers of vulnerable populations like slum locations. We also put social infrastructure, hospitals, schools, to see what is the extent of the probability of getting inundated. And various under various scenarios, like at a 200 mm of rainfall, almost 30% of Chennai is at the risk of being inundated. If you look at 400 mm of rainfall, which is like a 1 in 25 year flood, almost 50% of Chennai is prone to getting flooded. And I think in December, what we saw was this 400 mm of rainfall. I think across 2 days, December 1st to 2nd, they almost got 400 mm of rainfall. The areas around the airport, which is, the southern part, received roughly around 200-250 mm of rainfall in just 1 day. And that entire area was kind of inundated. Even in the northern parts of the city, we saw areas were inundated, but some of the central parts where, recently in the last 1 year, there has been a lot of work that has been going on to upgrade the stormwater drains in those areas, and we saw that those central areas did not really get flooded. So I think there is a lot of good work that GCC is also doing to upgrade the stormwater drainages, and as that happens, I think many parts of the city will really not, hopefully not get flooded as we saw in December. So as I said, what we also did was kind of overlap slum locations. So this is a mapping that we did where we overlapped locations of slums and looked at densities of these slums. So if you look at the dark red polygons, these are slums that are high dense, that are almost looking at almost 500 persons per hectare and above, in these slums. So, and if you look at the kind of morphological pattern, they are all along the canals and drains of Chennai. So this becomes, and these are most prone to flooding during the high intensity rainfalls that Chennai get in August onwards, every year. So coming to the second bit that we were talking about was the GHG inventory, the greenhouse gas emission inventory, and this was done, using the globally kind of accepted protocol, which is the community scale greenhouse gas emission inventory framework. So three major sectors were looked at, which is stationary energy, transport, and waste. And stationary energy, which basically accounts for your electricity consumption in the city across various sectors. So 71% of the GHG emissions is from the energy sector, 16% from transport, and out of that about 14% from private transport, meaning your private vehicles, cars, two-wheelers, and then 13% is from the waste sector. So mainly methane and things like that. So if you had to compare across cities, so Chennai is about 14.38 million metric tons of CO2 for the year 2018-19. If you look at similar, other cities, maybe having more population like Bangalore, which is roughly about 12 million population, in almost double the area as Chennai, has about 18 million metric tons, and Mumbai about 25 million metric tons. So coming to the third, and I think the most important bit, was the action plan development. So what we did was we modeled these emissions across various scenarios. So we looked at a business as usual. If we are going to continue the way we are, we're looking at almost a 400% increase in emissions by 2050. And if we look at an existing and planned scenario, existing plan is basically just looking at the current actions, policies, plans that are in place, that are being implemented. If we take that into consideration, we're almost looking at 100% increase in emissions. So the third scenario that we developed was an ambitious scenario. If you had to raise the ambition in terms of pushing the boundaries and what can be, really achieved in terms of ambitious projects and initiatives to reduce emissions in a more ambitious manner, we're looking at a reduction in emissions of about 45%, 44% by 2050. And I think the most ideal scenario, which there are barriers towards achieving this, which is the extended scenario, was looking at a reduction of about 87%, which is almost a close to net zero scenario. So this is the targets that the city set. The city set a target in line with the Paris Agreement, which is to achieve 50% reduction by 2030 and work towards net zero by 2050. So the vision statement was a resilient and proactive Chennai. So two main objectives, one looking at water balance and carbon neutrality. So 6 thematic areas were identified under the climate action plan, which is electricity, electrical grid and renewable energy, building energy, sustainable transport, waste management, urban flooding and water scarcity, and vulnerable population and health. So, which was across mitigation and adaptation. So I'm not going to get into each of these action, each of these thematics. I'll just pick one from the mitigation and one from the adaptation point of view. So this is the transport one that I'm just going to look at. So the overall objective was looking at sustainable mobility. So one was fuel shift towards less polluting energy sources, and all trips to move towards walking, cycling, and public transport by the horizon year. And for each, there was a short-term, medium-term, and long-term set of targets that were set across various KPIs. And some of the actions that were identified, and this is across sectors, stakeholders, and this requires multiple stakeholders to actually come together to implement. So some of these actions are improve intermodal connectivity, coverage, and frequency of public transport services, identify and develop bicycle highways exclusive for NMT users, support electrification of MTC. So this is something that MTC came up with, saying that they will work towards 100% electrification of their bus fleets by 2040. So this was also factored in, and then incentivize private vehicles to achieve 100% electrification by 2050, and increase ethanol blending in petrol and diesel. So this is also something that the central government is looking at in a big way, and is trickling down to all the states. The other thematic, which from an adaptation point of view, is looking at vulnerable population and health. So climate proofing for all. So provision of climate proofed housing for vulnerable population, and building climate resilient health systems for all. So because what we also saw was during the monsoon season, people living in these vulnerable locations are the most affected by health related issues, like increased cases of dengue and malaria was seen across Chennai during the rainy seasons. So again, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but some of the actions identified was rehabilitating populations in floodplains, peripheries of water bodies, low-lying areas, and nearby coastal creeks. This is also something that the Tamil Nadu Urban Habitat Board is looking at. And I think it's also something that is very sensitive in nature, because many of these people also have their livelihoods attached to these areas. So I think we also need to look at models of rehabilitation which are in situ, or more, where we don't cut off people from the ties that they have with the urban areas that they have been part of for many decades. Second is ensuring retrofitting of existing slum housing to be more heat resilient. These are very simple things that can be done. Just painting their roofs white is a first step, in that. Third, develop decentralized health services infrastructure for people living in slums. So something similar to the Basti clinics that you have in Delhi. Then fourth, prepare an operational framework for implementation of the Tamil Nadu state action plan for climate change and human health. And fifth, conduct assessment of disaster relief centers that are in climate risk zones. So we also realize that many of the disaster relief centers are also located within areas that are prone to flooding and which are prone to flooding. So I think the final bit to this is, I think one of the most important bits is how do you involve community in the whole process. And we looked at information sharing as well as engagement and communication as a key part across all these 6 thematics, and we've kind of made it part of the plan that there needs to be a more effective way that we communicate the issues related to climate change, the effects of climate change, as well as what citizens can do to address these issues to climate change. So there was a set of actions that we could look at where we engage the public themselves. And I think what we also realized by doing 200 discussions across 2 years was that even people within the government really don't understand the effects or the impacts of climate change. And I think there's a lot of sensitizing and capacity building that needs to be done within the government itself, but also among the citizens themselves. So I think communicating in the local language is something that is key to a place like Chennai, because I think the people of Chennai, I think, have a deep love for the language as well as the city. So if we are able to leverage on using, the local language to communicate some of these things more effectively, there can be, big, huge impact. So I'll end here. I'm not going to get into the details of the proposal of how we're going to, structure the implementation. This was the entire, MER framework, the monitoring and evaluation framework. How does the different systems at the state and the city levels together to work towards the implementation of this? I think I'm close to the end of my time, so I'm ending here. You can all access this climate action plan on the Tamil Nadu Green Climate Company's website. Under resources, you can, both the English and Tamil versions are available. It's about 300 plus pages, so you can access it there. Maybe just to end, what I would say is, going forward at C40, we're looking at working towards mainstreaming this climate action plan into the master plan of Chennai. I think it's a very opportune moment because Chennai is currently preparing its master plan for the year 2046. So we are actually trying to support CMDA to integrate this climate action plan into the master plan. That is one of the key things we are looking at. We're also looking at supporting, the Chennai city to kind of implement some of the high impact actions that are coming out of this climate action plan, in terms of actions that help you bring a huge reduction in emissions as well as build, resilience to the risks. So I'll end here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Benjamin, for that overview of the Chennai Climate Action Plan. At least it gave us a flavor for those who may not have seen it earlier, of the kind of different sectors involved in developing an action plan of that kind. To do this, I particularly would invite all our viewers and others to please look at the Chennai Climate Action Plan, which has been prepared. And I'll add a little self-advertisement plug here. Those who take the trouble to read that, also please read the approach paper prepared by the Climate Chennai, which has also taken into account the suggestions and proposals made in the Chennai Climate Action Plan, and taken maybe a slightly different view of some of the proposals, and it will give you an interesting insight into some of the pros and cons of the different proposals made. There have been some questions on the Q&A. We'll take them up, and I'll invite Benjamin to have a look at those comments or questions in the Q&A and chat box, and we'll take those up when it comes to. So now I'll next request Professor Kurian Joseph to speak. Kurian Joseph is the head of the Climate Change Department at Anna University, has been an advisor to the process of the preparation of the Climate Action Plan in Chennai, as well as we would, I'm sure, benefit from his expertise in some of the broader areas that we are discussing about climate change in the Chennai context as well as generally in urban contexts. So over to Professor Kurian Joseph.
Thank you. I hope you're able to see my screen. My screen is visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I'm audible also. Okay. At the outset, I take this opportunity to thank and also share some of the views related to cities and climate change. Of course, the context is already presented, the background, and in Chennai context, the climate action plan also is shared. So what I will do is these were the questions that were shared with us, and it was also highlighted by our Mr. Dr. Raghunandan. Basically, the questions were when we talk about or when we connect cities and climate change, whether the climate impacts or climate change impacts of cities are distinct with reference to other geographies. That was the first question. But the answer to this is climate change don't distinguish between countries, cities, villages, or rural areas. But when it comes to the impacts, certainly the cities have more impact because of the large number of people who live in small areas, as already has been presented. So the impact point of view, cities gets priority. Cities needs to get priority. And second, the cities, because of our population, because of our consumption and contribution to the GDP, it is the city people who contribute largely to the cause of climate change in terms of energy and the associated aspects. So from that point of view, a city-based climate action, city-specific climate actions is a must, whether it is mitigation, whether it is adaptation or resilience, which are the three key dimensions of these actions. Okay, so we have to think globally, but all the actions have to take place locally, and from governance point of view, the bottommost level that is possible is at city level. Of course, all the citizens will also need to contribute to the city's action. So city-specific climate action plans are must, but it should align with our state action plans, national action plans, and also the global agenda of our Paris Agreement. And when it comes specific to adaptation, as already been highlighted, of course, now only we have started talking about adaptation at global level, because adaptation is specifically a local issue. Okay, depending upon the effects of mitigation, to what extent we get affected could vary, but we should be prepared to face the kind of consequences through adaptation and resilience measures. Climate change impacts, everybody talked about, and all of us know, but it was highlighted that still the public are not very aware of it. That is true. Everybody knows about climate change, but what causes climate change? What are the impacts of climate change? If you ask, even learned people are not aware of it. To a great extent, awareness creation, appreciation of the different actions and connecting it with climate change and climate action is needed. A lot of actions are taking place, and this webinar is also one such action towards this. And when it comes to any city, the planning should start with understanding the profile of the city. That is where the climate actions of cities will differ. Though it follows the same framework, since the city profiles are different, the actions are also different. For example, if you take Chennai context in terms of the population density, in terms of the eco-sensitive aspects, especially we have three key water bodies. We have also at least 8 square kilometers of moderately dense forest as part of the city, about 20 kilometers of coastal length, and about 360 square kilometers of built up area as part of the city. So city specific action should start with the city profiling. And at our Center for Climate Change and Disaster Management, we are supporting the state government in terms of profiling the whole state and preparing adaptation plans for the key sectors. We start with the climate modeling and projections based on the latest IPCC scenarios. And then for the water sector, agriculture sector, forest sector, coastal ecosystems, as well as cities, how this projected climate situation will impact and how we need to move towards the action plan. Action plan, in our opinion, it should go further down to the district and the city level. We have a multidisciplinary team which is supporting these activities. Since the time is short, I will just briefly highlight some of the findings, especially in the context of Chennai city. And as many of you are aware, as per IPCC 6th assessment report, the kind of climate projections and studies we are now doing based on shared socioeconomic pathways. Benjamin was presenting about RCPs, representative concentration pathways. That was the kind of scenario setting as per AR5. Now AR6 moved to SSP situations. Of course, there is some commonality and some differences. So we have the projections with reference to the latest AR6 scenarios, and for near century, mid-century, and end century, with reference to temperature, with reference to the rainfall. And now if you take Chennai, especially the observed temperature trend, if you take 1950 to 2020, the average maximum is 33.2 degree. Average minimum is 23.3 degree. And as per our projection, this temperature is projected to increase in terms of annual average maximum under SSP 24.5, which is a mid-path kind of scenario, which will be in line with the current business as usual scenario. And SSP 58.5, that is the extreme situation which could be possible, which may lead to a global average temperature rise by about 4.5 to 5 degrees. Whereas in Paris Agreement, we are targeting 2 degrees centigrade, ideally 1.5 degrees centigrade. So this SSP 24.5 could be the scenario that we could take into consideration, hoping that all of us will act towards achieving the Paris targets of at least 2 or 2.5. So keeping this SSP 24.5 scenario in mind, if you analyze in terms of heat wave days, the past baseline, if we had 24 heat wave days during 1985 to 2014, in the near century, that is from 2021 to 2050, it could get doubled to about 49. Mid-century, 51 to 2080, it could increase to 93, and end century, 125. That is as per SSP 2 4.5 scenario, a mid-path progress of development. Ideal situation is sustainability, that is SSP 1. So the mid-path scenario, which is the one more likely to happen based on the kind of efforts that is globally taking place. But if you only talk and don't take any action globally, then we could expect SSP 8.5 scenario, where by end of century, in 20 years, we could get 186 days of heat waves. So the heat wave days are increasing. That is the kind of information. It's not just increasing, it gets doubled and 3 times towards the end of this century. Similarly, heavy rainfall. According to IMD, if the rainfall is greater than 64.5 millimeters, then it is considered as heavy rainfall. So these heavy rainfall days during our baseline, which was 1985 to 2014, it was 100 days during that period. It's not per year, it is during this baseline period, 100 days of heavy rainfall was there. And this heavy rainfall days will increase 100 to 105 to 125, and by end of this century, it could double to about 190 high rainfall days. And if it is SSP 8.5, that is the extreme scenario, it could still double. So, which means 100 could become about 200. And when it comes to the sea level rise, of course, there are different projections. People normally also frightened by quoting the highest possible scenario, that is RCP 8.5. But if you take the SSP 4.5 scenario, we are more likely to get 1 feet rise in sea level. It is about 25 centimeters rise in sea level, and that could lead to about 100 hectares of coastal inundation with reference to the Chennai city. Of course, in terms of global actions and national actions, we have the framework, and generally who deal with climate change knows what we need to do. We have called it as low carbon, long-term actions in terms of improving or decarbonizing our electricity systems, transport systems, building systems, focusing on sustainable urbanization, circular economy, as was already highlighted, innovations, especially in industrial systems. The key focus is on improving the efficiency. And one important aspect which I would like to emphasize is that when we talk about cities or climate smart city development, there are different frameworks existing. More or less, they overlap. There could be a few minor issues which there could be differences. So let us keep one framework, and we have a framework which is developed by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs in association with the Climate Center for Cities at National Institute of Urban Affairs. This focuses on 5 thematic areas, because most of the issues which was discussed during the different presentations are getting captured. Because the 5 thematic areas, it starts with, of course, urban planning, green cover, biodiversity, and energy, green building, mobility and air quality, waste management, water management. So I will just focus on waste management. I understand that in the subsequent seminars, there is going to be discussions specifically with reference to each of these sub-themes. And when you take up that, I would advise that you keep this framework, their indicators, and the current status, especially if you take the waste management, which is, of course, one of my areas of specialization. There are 6 indicators which that framework takes into account. First aspect is the kind of waste minimization initiatives that the city has undertaken. Then second, the extent of dry waste recovery and recycling that is taking place. Third, C&D waste management. Fourth, the extent of wet waste processing that is taking place. Then, of course, the scientific landfilling and operations, landfills or dump site scientific remediation. So, very 6 simple indicators are used, and they have tried to capture this information from the 4,000 plus cities of the country, where they could get only feedback from about 150 cities. So we can keep this framework, and what is important with reference to this key framework is that there are identified indicators based on which we can start collecting the information, and data is the base for any planning to take place. Of course, the Chennai City Action Plan has initiated data in terms of our inventories, and according to the inventory, waste management is contributing about 13% of the greenhouse gas. But when it comes to waste management, it's not just its contribution to the greenhouse gas emissions, but in terms of the public health benefits and other social benefits, even economic benefits. Anything that we waste is not just the material, it is also the energy that is integrated with or embedded in this waste. That kind of a consciousness, if we have, we will take efforts to minimize our waste generation, and also effective recycling. And for those who are not aware of the waste management context in Chennai, Chennai as of now generates about 7,600 tons of waste every day, of which only about 2,000, nearly 2,000 tons is getting processed. Wet processing, about 1,000 tons, dry waste processing, about 800, then C&D waste, about 400. And 2 of our dump sites are still receiving about 5,500 tons of waste. So this could be one area, and this is one area of concern for all cities where the climate change can drive the citizens to have better waste management practices. It's not just the city, all of us who contribute to the waste also should take our own contribution in terms of refusing to purchase what we don't need, reducing the waste production when we buy things that we need, and reusing things rather than having the throwaway culture, which is very high in cities as compared to the rural area. And what we can't recycle, what we can't reuse, we should support getting it to the recycling. And for that, the key starting point is waste segregation and also supporting. So thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm open for answering questions if you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Joseph. I now call upon our last speaker, Thomas Franco, who is a leading activist with the Tamil Nadu Science Forum, which is active on many fronts of science popularization, science communication, policy studies. And the forum is now engaged along with the Tamil Nadu government at various district level activities also in relation to climate change. So I'll now call upon Thomas Franco to please speak or make his presentation, whichever he's doing. Franco.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks to the previous presenters who provided very interesting information with slides. I'm not making a presentation, but number one, today itself there is another webinar going on at the same time, which I could not join because of this. that is titled as Climate Change Fiction and Its Potential for Transformation, organized by the Global Tapestry of Alternatives. We should look at their materials also when we talk about climate change and climate mitigation. Secondly, Raghu in his presentation, he highlighted few things. One of that is that focus on planning. Second is integrated approach for climate change. With that, I will start the planning aspect, where it is, what it is happening, apart from the presentations made. I'll start with the Chennai Climate Change Action Plan. It was made public in September 2022. 1 month was provided for giving our input. We had a very detailed discussion, a full day discussion at Madras School of Social Work. Some of the best known experts in the field were there. Some of the activists there were there. Organizations working in the field were there. And I requested the Chennai Corporation Commissioner that time, Mr. Bedi, and he had sent some of his staff as well as the consultants who were working on this. We presented 65 recommendations. I will not go into the detail, but some of that I would like to highlight. We had suggested that time itself that Chennai Climate Action Plan should include Tiruvallur, Chengalpet and Kanchipuram. And we pointed out that for our discussion also only a gist of the climate action plan was available in the website. Full action plan was not there. When we asked the consultants, they said that it is still under preparation. But within whatever was available, we made our recommendations. But unfortunately, even today, the full report is not available in the Greater Chennai Corporation website. It is not available in the Green Company website also. Secondly, the master plan, what we had suggested, Chennai climate change plan, had not gone into the Chennai master plan, which was prepared in 2008, and city development plan 2009, which had sustainable development goals integrated to that. That was not found in the Chennai climate action plan. We also pointed out what are the problems where we highlighted the greed, corruption, and governance, that is misgovernance, are responsible for the position Chennai has come into. Then we also prepared a draft action plan where we highlighted that the philosophy of urbanization has to change. Instead of just talking about the carbon emission, involve the people. Now, we don't have a planning commission. We have a Niti Ayog, I call it a Niti Ayog. And we don't have an urban plan at the national level, apart from what is prepared by the ministries, which are using only consultants to prepare this. Only recently, the government of Kerala has announced an urban mission, which is going to prepare an action plan for Kerala. But for the country as a whole, it is totally dependent on consultants. And this is what I found in the Chennai Climate Change Action Plan also. Climate justice was missing. We had suggested area-wise, electricity, what is to be done, public transport, what is to be done, and in public transport, we had suggested that for a few years at least, make public transport free so that the people switch over to public transport instead of using private vehicles, which is flooding the Chennai city. The waste segregation, just now I saw the presentation. Perungudi and Kodangayur, 2,500 and 2,800 tons of waste. And I'm living in Perungudi, luckily little far away from that dump. it only keeps going up. They have been talking about biomining, some new technologies and all. But the Perangudi is one of the best swamp that is filled with this waste. And during the flood, recent flood, we saw how the people were affected in that area. But there is no waste segregation taking place in the corporation. I checked up recently, hardly 20% of the waste collected is segregated. Otherwise, the rest is just dumped like that. And people have to be given that awareness of segregating at the doorstep. That is not taking place. Integrated water management plan, we don't find something. Coastal ecosystem was totally ignored in the climate action plan. And we had in our recommendation given 3 pillars for what is to be done. That is, 1, assess the risk and vulnerabilities, map them area-wise. 2, conduct studies, hydro, geological, anthropogenic, socio-economic, demography, working conditions, groundwater availability, etc. We had also suggested that each slum should be assessed separately. We cannot have a C40 plan for all the cities which can be implemented everywhere. And we have the unique opportunity or availability of 6 rivers, including the Buckingham Canal. If they are maintained properly, the encroachments, if they are removed itself, whenever the flood cannot be projected. Whatever projections is based on the temperature we are giving. But what we are getting is based on storms, cyclones, which we cannot predict. But if the water drainage system, we had pointed out that in 256 places, there was no the link between the stormwater drains. We call it the missing links. We gave the list where it is. Now, part of that has been rectified in the last 1 year, but not all. And the airport. Why do we require another airport? Parantur airport will destroy 17 major water bodies. During this rain, we saw what was happening there. And now, only for the interest of the real estate people, another airport, we have given certain alternatives also. Okay, if you require more airport, what can be done in Chennai airport, what can be done, we have provided alternatives also. But that is not being listened to. That is going to be a major disaster if that is going to be implemented for Chennai. Similarly, the powers, when we compare the powers of the municipal corporation, that is very, very little. CMDA is working on one side, the corporation is working on another side. If you look at the powers of mayors of London or New York, we don't have even 5% of the powers which they have in Tamil Nadu. 200 parks are dying, we had pointed out with details. 18 lakh houses do not have water connection. There is no inequality study. Health infrastructure, I saw in the presentation, a recommendation has been done, but that has not come into effect. Should we wait for 2030 to start that? Why not in 2024? Pumped water storage is one of the recommendations, which is not suitable for Chennai. Smart city, we have seen the smart city project, which is implemented only in part of the city, that is T-Nagar area. There is absolutely no improvement. And the Pallikaranai, once again, I am touching that. Pallikaranai swamp is one of the best known areas for retaining water. From 5,500 square kilometers, now they say it is 500 square kilometers. Even that is encroached and nothing is done to rectify that. There are plans, there are action plans, but these action plans do not involve people. Today, whatever is being done, it is done by the departments, the governments. I saw the slides. I have gone through that already. Stakeholders consultation. Who are there? Only the government officials. And few people who are friendly with the World Bank projects, they are there for the discussions. Ordinary people, the slum dwellers, the educational institutions, none of them are involved in the process. So unless there is a planning which is taking place with people's involvement, there cannot be any real mitigation of these issues. I would like to quote once again, the 2015, the major flood took place, 2016. We did a detailed work. I was then correspondent of the SBOA group of institutions who involved the colleges, schools, and academics. And we prepared a very big report which had clear recommendations only on flood mitigation. This is the book. It's more than 205 pages. It had recommendations with a summary. It had social audit reports of every ward during the flood, students' report of certain areas where the students and teachers went and studied, and the reporters' report. At that time, ward-wise, there were many reporting in different newspapers. What has been the root cause? All that was presented to the corporation, the government, all departments, but very little has been done while implementing the recommendation. Now we have the Chennai Master Plan 3 under preparation. No consultation. Master Plan 2, when we look at it, it says that even the Master Plan 1, 60% of the data was not available. And now also we are finding, of course, in the other study, you have given a different picture, but solid waste management, there we found that they are using still 1996 data and then projection. So if real assessments are not done, Chennai Master Plan is now going to cover Ranipet and all. And they are saying that from 1,189 square kilometers, it will be 5,900 square kilometers. Should we require that kind of an urbanization? Do we have a real master plan for seeing that the disasters do not continue? So what I would request is that, number one, now the Indian Institute of Human Settlements is studying this, but let them involve people, not only experts, ordinary people. Do not have just one plan, have many plans, regional-wise plans, area-wise plans. I was talking to the commissioner. He said that we have the what you call ward sabhas where discussions can take place. Ward sabhas I have seen. That is a place where people go with all their demands. There is no discussion taking place. So separate discussions are required. Dr. Abdul Kalam had suggested this provision of urban amenities in rural areas, Pura, but that has not been implemented. If the whole people have to shift from the rural areas to the urban areas, it is not going to be sustainable. So let us discuss more. And I would also suggest to you that in the next webinars, please involve more people to participate, have Tamil translation, and a lot of ordinary people should be involved. There are a number of organizations working on environment here. So we should involve all of them so that we can have a concrete plan which can be implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you much, Franco. I think Franco has highlighted three major points which I think strike me as being important, not only for our discussions, but in general for this process of urban planning and work, which is a point that I made right in the beginning also, but emphasized very well by Franco. The first is, which he has emphasized, is the extent of powers and the extent of democratization within urban governance. The ward level committees that he is talking about are sort of, shall we say, equivalent to the panchayats in a rural area. And today the panchayats are, I think, far more empowered than the ward committees in urban areas, and perhaps even more so in metropolitan areas. So that's one aspect. The second aspect that he has emphasized is on people's participation in the planning process. There has been several considerable discussion on this. The governments and cities do ask for public comments, etc. But very often these turn out to be in the nature of formalities rather than in the nature of proper discussions and incorporation of grassroots perspectives. And the third aspect which he spoke of, which was, I think, very interesting, and I've seen some of the documentation that he is speaking about, particularly as reported in several newspapers, is the role of citizen science or citizen planning in this process. There are also moves in the city of Bangalore, for example. A whole movement has come up based on citizens' participation in the planning process, which is also getting politically involved. So I think these are very important discussions going forward on this, not only in terms of urban planning, but in terms of urban planning along with the challenge of climate change. So once again, thank you, Franco, and thank you to all the panelists. There are several questions or comments in the chat box. If any of these speakers or the panelists see particular points that you would like to respond to, please welcome. Does anybody have any points that he wants to? Raman, does anything strike you that you would like to respond to? Raman or Benjamin, Professor Joseph, Franco, any of the comments that you want to respond to?
I couldn't see any serious questions in
Okay.
the chat box. Okay, those were mainly about the speakers and some appreciation about the works. But I couldn't see any specific questions raised by anybody. But I have few comments with reference to what Dr. Thomas was talking about.
Yeah.
All of us agree with the points which was expressed by Dr. Thomas. But at the same time, we should also agree the kind of limitations the system and the citizens have in terms of having an extended public consultations. We can't go to individuals and ask their opinion and then take into account. In a wider level, both the climate action plan, the master plan, there was very extensive opportunities given. Of course, master plan is only in the initial stages, and the master plan, they are planning to integrate the climate actions. So the ideal situation is the best, which may not be possible. So we have to start doing and then improvising. That approach needs to be appreciated, and the people or organizations who have close access with the community, they should get the pulse of the people, share, and then participate, as was done by Dr. Thomas and the group. That's the way forward that we should take, especially with reference to waste management. It's very easy to say there is nothing is happening, but we should also appreciate the kind of challenges that we all citizens generate waste, but we still don't have a place where this waste can be managed. Now, of course, it was whose fault we can ask, but still, even in last 20, 30 years, we are not able to find a place. And now we are looking at the places where we are dumped the waste to reclaim part of that space and to set up waste management facilities where certain facilities require centralized processing. But bulk of it needs to be managed decentralized manner. The dry waste, the wet waste, which also requires a place where the dry waste could be stored and sorted out. The wet waste could be composted. And we know the kind of opposition that comes when the municipalities look for locating a micro-composting center to process a 1 ton of waste which is generated in that community.
Very difficult.
So finding a place, paying for waste management, supporting segregation, there are several things we as citizens should understand and then play and work with the city government. That's the key point which I would like to make. Of course, in Perungudi also, as he said, of course, still waste dumping is taking place. But last 3 years, almost 30 lakh cubic meters of waste has been mined out. So that space is now available to develop part of the waste processing facilities. Several actions are taking place. Lot more needs to be done. Let's all work together, contribute towards that.
Yeah. There are 2 or 3 questions that were raised by some people on the thing. 2 of them pertain to the issue of zero emissions. One pertained to zero emissions by electric vehicles, and one pertained to the zero emissions target of the Indian Railways. And the question is, how can we talk about zero emissions in these sectors when the power that is generated either in the railways or to charge EV vehicles are coming from coal-based power stations? So these are related questions. If none of the panelists want to take that up, let me answer that very briefly. The question is correct.
I could
Sorry?
take it up.
My response to this question is...
Yes, anybody wants to take it up?
Well,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
Benjamin has answered one of the questions in the chat itself.
Benjamin, if you want to.
Yeah. One of the questions I've answered. I think the other one is, I think the fundamentals of it is that I think we need to move our grid also to, green our grid, move towards renewable energy. I think that's the, need.
I think on the railways target specifically, I think the railways is planning to shift to RE completely for all its operations and electrify, all their locomotives and so on.
Yeah, they've got a second leg on which their plan stands, which is the offsetting of the emissions through plantation. Which is, of course, as you know, slightly dicey about how the calculations come, but they are moving towards getting all their power from renewable sources, which the questioner should know also now includes hydro, which is classified as renewables, and then some of the offsets. And as you know, railways has ample land along the railway tracks, and they've got a fair amount of sequestration that they are planning to offset. How much is actually offset or not is, of course, slightly open to discussion, but they have a plan going in that direction there. Then there was one comment saying that restoration and conservation of natural habitats in urban areas should be included. My understanding in both the Chennai Climate Action Plan as well as in what we have studied, there is a good emphasis on restoration of green areas and plantations and water bodies. Water bodies in particular, which is a point that Franco was also making, and we will be looking at this in our next discussion on extreme rainfall and urban flooding, is a very important part of mitigating the risks from extreme rainfall and flooding. Is if you expand and conserve water bodies. However, there is a question remains, how do you prevent further encroachment? And there are demands by several people, which I hope will be taken up, that once water bodies are restored, they should be legislated as eco zones, no development zones, so that it is inbuilt either in the master plan or in other processes to ensure that there is no further encroachment, or once again you destroy the water bodies that have been created. And that is correct. Is there any other question that I've left out? Karthik, is there anything that you've noticed that I've left out?
No, I will just add to this.
Please, Dr.
e-vehicles.
Joseph. Yeah.
Yeah, the e-vehicles. What needs to be appreciated is we can't wait for all the electricity systems to be decarbonized to start making changes in our transport system. These things should happen parallelly. And not only these two, many of the actions that we are talking, all these things should happen parallelly. And when we do that, there will be improvements and adjustment that is required. So not just look at electricity is from coal, so don't have e-vehicles. Even having e-vehicles itself will improve the air quality of the city.
Sure.
That is a co-benefit which we will be getting. And by the time all the city vehicles move to e-vehicles, we will also have a great part of our energy coming from renewable systems. And even now also, whoever wants to have renewable energy, there is a possibility to buy that from the grid. Of course, they may have to pay a little extra. It could be coming from the same power line, but those who produce green energy and feed to the power system, that can be purchased by the consumers. So that holistic awareness people should have to appreciate the different kinds of efforts that is taking.
Right. Franco's got his hand up. Franco, you want to say something?
Yeah. Yes. Number one, thanks to Mr. Benjamin John for sharing the full climate action plan for Chennai in the chat. I'll go through that in detail. Secondly, to the response of Mr. Kurian, see, I'm not just an activist. I keep, we as a team, we work with the government also. Last week also, I had a very big seminar on the Chennai rain and the flood mitigation, in which we invited the commissioner. He also participated. And I am also a trustee of Exnora International here, which is doing the solid management campaign among the people, among the schools. What I'm saying is that what has been done is not adequate. And you presented in your presentation that the solid waste management still so much 5,300 tons or so is dumped in dump yards. Unless we find solution, I have seen that Alapi in Kerala, it was a stinking municipality which with people's participation could be converted into a beautiful area without so much of problem with solid waste. So like that, there has to be people's involvement. Unless that is done, there cannot be any better solution. Thank you.
Benjamin, you got your hand up.
Yeah. I just wanted to just respond to some of what Franco was mentioning. So one of the things was, I think we did receive the suggestions that they had put in. I think we had received almost 400, 500 of the same thing which was repeated, and those were gone through in detail, and we have written detailed responses to each of them, and they have been made part of the final plan. So for instance, just a few examples, the biodiversity was not looked at. That was one of the comments. So there was an entire section included on biodiversity just from a baselining perspective. Now, I think it's also important, I think, as planners, we are very bad at communicating. Maybe some of these things are not communicated properly. I think it's important to also understand the scale of planning. At what scale am I planning? And this is a city level plan and not a ward level plan. I think what as a next step that we should also work towards doing is reflecting this at a ward or even a lower level of, say at a neighborhood level, what does this action plan mean, right? So I think that's the next step of it. And unfortunately, we are not able to address the entire spectrum of, all scales of planning. So this is maybe looking at the city at 1 in 10,000 or 20,000, but we have not been able to come down to say 1 in 500 or 1,000 or, something like that. So I think I would urge Franco. One thing is that, I think he's talking about a bottom up planning of the city, which is a very relevant, question that he's raising, and which is something important. Unfortunately, most of our planning systems today are imagined as top-down systems, right? And I think if we need to change that, we need to change our town and country planning acts in itself. So reimagination of that is, where that the solution would lie there, looking at, we need to bring in more opportunities for participation and planning at a ward or at a local level. Right now, we are imagining the city, planning at a city level, and at a city level, it's maybe difficult for everyone to also relate to that scale. So it does not also make sense for us to engage, a wide variety of stakeholders at the city level, because they may not be able to understand what at the city level. We need to break these plans down into something that is more understandable to everyone. And I think that's the exercise that we all have to embark on in demystifying this at what it means at the ward level, and working, at the ward level to develop these plans further. And another thing is, we're also hoping to extend this plan to the entire region. As we are trying to integrate this with the master plan, so we'll be extending this plan also to the entire region, working with CMTA, hopefully to do that, in the coming months or so. Yeah, and I think the last point I'll just touch upon. I know we've come to the end, and I'm holding up everyone, because I think it was dinner time, so I'm sorry for that. But I think the last thing is, even if we go to the ward level or even if we come to the city level, there's a lack of data for planning. So, that is a big issue, and there's always contention in data. So I might project it in a certain way, someone else might project data in a certain way. So there's always contention in the way data itself is being projected, and the availability of data itself is a big issue for planning. And I've also realized from my previous experiences of working with cities, as you plan for a granular level for the city is changing. So the moment you finish a plan, with 1 year, you go back and you'll realize, oh, the city has changed in that 1 year. So is planning also the solution, is the question that, we need to ask each other. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you all very much.
Can I also make just one point about planning?
Yes, Raman. Yeah.
One thing I'd like to disclose is that Vasudha Foundation is also involved in planning with the Tamil Nadu government's collaboration in 4 districts at the moment. And these districts are the Nilgiris, the Viruddhanagar, the Rameshwaram district, and one other district which I'm now forgetting the name of, but 4 districts. The idea is to do a district level plan, not do a city level plan, but also focus on the cities within those districts and look at it from that perspective. Now, I would say that our plan, whatever it emerges, might be criticized on the same grounds as the C40 plan for Chennai has been criticized. But what happens in these cases is that these are, there are deadlines, there are things that need to be done in a time-bound manner, and so on and so forth. So I would actually urge citizen groups and citizen activists to think of these initiatives as a first step.
Yeah.
and draw a line in the sand and then move forward. Further, I would say that no plan will be perfect ever. It has to be a work in progress. The third thing I would like to say, that in the Indian context, I think we need to recognize that it's going to be very difficult to implement plans because of the contention of different departments. Our departments tend to function in silos, and these initiatives often require cooperation and integration, and that is a very big problem. So, for example, on EVs, for example, the transport department of Tamil Nadu is digging its heels in notifying certain actions to make it easy for fleet operators and the buses and so on to electrify. There is this. I don't know if that's been resolved. Last I heard that there was a problem there in terms of faster uptake of electric vehicles. It may have been resolved now. So all I'm saying is that we need to think of these initiatives as beginnings, work in progress. And I think it's a great idea. What Benjamin was saying was that there should be some sort of a coming together of the top down and the bottom up. Maybe it should start with the bottom up and then be integrated in a more holistic manner at the top down level, because not everything can be planned and executed at a ward level or even the RWA level. There are certain things that require a city level perspective, and so we need to recognize that.
Great. Thank you, Raman, and thank you to all the panelists for their lovely presentations and for the discussions that we have had. I wish we could have spent some more time on discussions, but as so many of the panelists say, there are limitations of time to everything. So we'll have to close our discussions here. I'd just like to say 2-3 things in closing. One is, I take what Raman was saying in that spirit, that every plan or every plan which is made is a first step. And I hope it is seen as an iterative process which continues to improve rather than a plan which is frozen in time. And in fact, in our approach paper that we have prepared, which also takes into account the Chennai Climate Action Plan, we've also put forward some critiques and some arguments, some pros and cons, looked at different aspects. And we have stated specifically there that even this critique, if you like, or this look at the plan is a first step of an iterative process, which we hope through interactions with experts, with civil society organizations, with government officials, with citizens groups, will keep improving. And this is a process of dialogue in which we are hoping that our Climate Chennai project will be able to play a catalytic role, along with other organizations, with Vasudha, with the C40 group, with the Anna University and others. We should really be forming a kind of multi-sectoral coalition. It's not just civil society, it's not just experts, it's not just officials, but it's all of them working together to come out with these perspectives, because each of them have a rationale for the perspective that they come out with and the reason that they do. Before closing, let me once again remind our panelists and our audience that the coming 8 to 10 weeks will see discussions on different sectors of extreme rainfall and flooding, on the very important issue of urban heat, next on sea level rise and coastal erosion, on the adaptation and resilience front, and then to look at different key aspects of mitigation, specifically on buildings and on waste, and finally on power generation, and of course on transportation as well. And I'd request everyone to look into that. And before closing, I'll let Kirti Bhai have the last word. Kirti Bhai.
Not the last word. Just a very quick sort of a thing. One is, of course, thank very much. I think it was very, very useful, very thoughtful, very informative discussion. So thank you, Franco Bhai. Thank you, Dr. Kurian. Thank you, Benjamin Saab. Thank you, Raman Saab. And of course, thank you, Dr. Raghunandan. Few things very quickly. One is I would like to take a permission because I realized that some of the slides which we saw were very brilliant slides, very useful slides, very informative slides, educative slides. So we'll take your permission to kind of, share them across because they tell a lot. And I hope you will not have any difficulty using the slides in terms of sharing it more widely. That's number one. Number two is this, that I do take Franco's point very well. Where are the people? And if we really assume and think that because we know we can speak in English, we can articulate, we can produce nothing PowerPoint presentation, we are the people is a big mistake. And I think we've got to kind of find a way to get some people in this process. And it's a structural problem also. It's not only they come here, they should be able to speak as well. They should be able to express themselves, should be asked, I think, questions. And therefore, my suggestion to Raghu Sahab is this, that let us examine this very seriously, even for the next meeting, whenever it takes place. I don't know whether we have access. I don't know whether we could reach out to them. But I think it's very important that we get some people. And I like Franco saying, not common people, ordinary people. And I think we got to get them to this particular meetings. The third point I would like to make is this, that this is my request to Benjamin, this is my request to Kurian, to Franco Sahab. I'm very fond of saying that this is not INHAF's webinar series. This is a series in partnership. And partnership is a strength in this work. And therefore, I would like to kind of find out if we could, if say, C40 could be a partner in this. If Doctors Kurian's University could be a partner in this. Is Franco's, I think, organization, many he represents part of this. Is Vasudha could be part of this, and the many others. So I'm essentially saying, and I've written to Dr. Raghunandan on this, spoken about this, we need partners. This can't be INHAF's work alone. We are a very small organization, we have very little ability and strength, and therefore I would request that even if possible, in the next webinar, we have at least 2-3 partners. And I not partner for the sake of partners. It's partnership in which you play a role, you advise, you use your network to invite people. And I think the word spread. So that is my next point. But for next point is this, is where is the government? I know they know all. But I think, as we're looking for people, we also look for people in the government who should be listening to this. And I'm not saying that they don't, but I think, people who should be here somehow. I don't know exactly how to get them. Maybe someone like Franco, someone like, I think, Raman Saab could help. But we've got to get these people to come in. Symbolically, even, it's very important we need them because, they got to listen to what is going on about the city. So that's my next point. And my last point, I think that's to Raghunandan sir, I think to my colleagues in this organization. I'm just thinking while listening to everyone, we need not really prepare new documents, honestly. If we take all documents which are there on this particular program, coming from C40, coming from others, coming from whoever, and just work on one aspect, how to take this document to people, how to involve them. I think we'll do greater service than I think, rewriting and refining what is being done. And I think, it's something which needs to be kind of, thought through very seriously. And that my last word is this, that I read somewhere only just yesterday. It was something that I read a long time ago. It said that we are all second-rate thinkers. And we are second-rate thinkers because we think what we think is the right thing to think. This particular issue if you are, and which has global dimension, national dimensions, regional dimensions, district dimensions, city dimensions, and it's a very complex thing. If we are not very innovative, if we don't think what is not thinkable, we will not go very far. And it also applies to urbanization, it also applies to cities, it also applies to climate change. And I personally feel our effort in Chennai is to really, if possible, find ways to kind of depart of ways of thinking, but the ways of thinking were not delivered, largely. And we require delivery, we require solutions, we require better approaches, we require better solutions. And I think we've got to kind of find a way of moving in that direction, even if we don't reach there. So with those words, thank you very much again. I think it has been a great learning experience, and I hope we have permission to use your slides for larger audiences. Is it okay, Benjamin?
Yes, we are fine, sir.
Yes, we are fine. Please.
Can't, you're mute.
Yeah, we are happy to share the presentations. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you all again. Thank you again to everyone for coming, and good night.
Thank you, Raghu Sam.
Good evening. Bye.
Thank you, Karthik. Thank you, Bhuma. Thank you, Atik, and everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.